So that comes from the very southern Italy, and it's Sicily, the island of Sicily, and we all come from pretty much Palermo. So it's weird because my mother's father's family, and then my dad's mother's family came from like a similar region in Palermo, and so it's really cool, and they all have really cool traditions and stuff. So uh, I definitely want to go someday, and yeah. So
And do you study Italian? Like, come
I
sta?
do
Or
not. My nonna, as I call her, which means grandmother in Italian, she would probably be very happy if I studied
it's
Italian, though. She would
it's a
probably,
good idea. So she can actually teach you Italian, right?
she learned, so I am fourth generation Italian.
Oh,
So
okay.
we had a lot of time within our family history that we learned English. And so her parents were fluent in Italian and actually would visit Italy quite often. But her herself, has not learned
Okay.
Italian until her adulthood. So, yeah.
If you did not tell me, I would guess your origin is more German origin.
Okay. So, I actually am very little German. I have very little German. I'm mostly English, and I am Italian, Native American. So I have, as we had discussed the first class, I actually do have some of those early North American tribes in my genetics, which is really cool to think about. And then I'm also partially German and have some other things. I may be partially Middle Eastern as well. So
Wow.
I have the whole globe, right? Pretty much.
Interesting, interesting.
Yeah. It's
Okay, I think let's get started. You
sounds
can start your presentation.
And thank you though for asking. I mean, it's again, it just shows you how diverse America is. So, alrighty, class. So to get started today, I'm going to share my screen. I'm gonna go here and say start sharing, and we will get started um, with these slides. So. Let me go ahead and scroll on. So yes, Unit 2 is going to be over the Renaissance. And as a short description, I have the Renaissance as a time of cultural, intellectual, and artistic changes during the 14th and 15th centuries. So this is the 1300s. Really, it's actually more, it's going to span the 1300s through the 1600s, because it got started in Italy in roughly the 1300s. So we will explore the beginning of what historians think of as the modern period of history. And this is especially the intellectual, artistic, and cultural changes that come from this time period. So this is where we start to see people thinking for themselves, artistic revolutions. This it will also give rise to the scientific revolution, which will challenge religion and old ways of thinking. So this time period is really, really important for the world that we live in today. And to start, we're going to look at what was the Renaissance exactly. And the Renaissance, so Renaissance, the word is actually a French word meaning rebirth. At this time period, beginning around 1453, they think was kind of the height of the Renaissance because this would be the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks. So the Ottoman Empire would take over Constantinople. And this was thought of as a rebirth of learning following the darkness of the medieval period. Because if you don't remember the last class, at the end of the last class, we had discussed the Black Plague and the 100 Years' War, which were two very scary and just dark periods for the for Europe. So this Renaissance was really a rebirth and would give rise to a lot of new aspects of Europe, and one's aspects that we still see today. So, so scholars of the Byzantine Empire would actually flee to safety. So after these Ottoman Turks took over Constantinople, the scholars or these teachers from the Byzantine Empire would flee to safety westward. So they would go over the from the from Constantinople, which was taken over by the Ottomans. They would start to advance westward towards Europe. And these scholars would boost their learning, which was helped by the development of printing. And they began to question the established ideas of religion, art, and science. So, during the Renaissance, scholarship began to develop independently of the church. And the human, rather than divine in life or religion, and art was underlined, and the individual became the ideal. So this time was all about the individual. It was about humanism. You know, what makes a person good, and what can a person do? What can a human do to give back to society and to supply for themselves in the ideal way? So this would become known as humanism, which we will talk about later on. And the challenging of fresh ideas would actually motivate explorers who began to open up new lands and trading routes, as well as to religious leaders such as Martin Luther, who set in motion the Protestant Reformation. So, this time of fresh ideas and new ideas and ways of thinking would give rise to these explorers like Christopher Columbus, and they would want to explore far out lands. And really, the first motivation of these explorers was to get to was to actually trade. They wanted to see spices were very important to these Europeans. So these explorers wanted to find new trading routes to trade spices. So this was their first really big motivation to start exploring and finding new trading routes and ways to travel. But inevitably, they would end up finding the Americas, South and North America. And then after that, obviously, quite a bit of change and globalization would happen. So does anybody have any questions thus far?
I wonder why spices were so important, because they
Yes.
could get unreasonably expensive. I don't know why, because
Mhm.
this is a kind of food just to
Mhm.
make things
Mhm.
more flavored. So I wonder why.
Yes, and from what I have read, spices were so important because it would mask and cover the taste of meat. They loved, their meat, and they would sometimes, especially in certain conditions, they weren't able to, the meat would taste terrible, so they would want to cover them with spices. And unfortunately, these spices were expensive because they would acquire spices from Southwest Asia, and and really this became, well, or no, not Southwest, Southeast Asia. Sorry, they would acquire these spices, and that just became really costly, inexpensive, and a lengthy process to get these spices from Southeast Asia all the way to Europe. So they wanted to find new trading routes and easier ways to acquire these spices to make the food more enjoyable. So,
Got it. Got it. Thank you.
yes,
Thank you.
of course, of course. And let me share this. Here we go. So, so the beginnings of the Renaissance. Um, so the Renaissance, Italy would actually become known as the birthplace of the Renaissance. This movement is started in Italy caused an explosion of creativity in art, writing, and thought that lasted from 1300 to 1600. And I would say 1300 to 1600 would be an accurate time frame of how long the Renaissance lasted. And then after 1600, we really started getting into the scientific revolution. And the Renaissance would actually it would eventually spread from northern Italy to the rest of Europe. So the Renaissance really getting it was the birthplace. It had the birthplace in Italy, and all of this, as mentioned earlier, this explosion of all these new ideas and art and cultural changes, but then it would inevitably spread throughout Europe and cause full-scale Renaissance throughout Europe. So Italy had three advantages that made it the birthplace of the Renaissance. So first were its thriving cities. It had thriving city-states, and it also had a wealthy merchant class. So within these city-states, you would have wealthy merchants such as the Medici family, and they were able to support these artists and these thinkers, these free thinkers, and this really influenced people to start spreading their own ideas. And then the third aspect of what made Italy the best place for the birthplace of the Renaissance was its classical heritage of Greece and Rome. So it had all these elements of Greece and Rome intertwined within its history and within the country. And Greece and Rome, obviously, were two of the most advanced civilizations of their time. We got so much. We have so much influence from these two empires, and really, it's really cool to see what came out of Rome and the fact that we have modern day aqueducts, and we have modern day roads, and we have modern day bridges because they were first created in Rome. So the Renaissance would also bring changes to classical and worldly values, including the studying of classical texts, which led to humanism, which was, again, humanism being the study of how to be a better human and how a human can give back to society. So the studying of classical texts led to humanism, or the intellectual movement that focused on human potential and achievements. Another one of these changes that was brought on by the Renaissance in Italy was the adopting of worldly pleasures, which basically meant that you can enjoy life and be active in events without offending God. In Italy, especially, the Catholic Church, and throughout Europe, the Catholic Church was very, very influential. And it would tell people how to live their lives, and you better live like this or else you will have consequences after death. And so many people were scared, and they would follow these ideals and these teachings. And with this Renaissance, again, people started saying, "Oh, we want to partake in our own pleasures, and we want to enjoy our life and not be afraid of God." And this included wearing different types of clothing or eating different kinds of foods. So one of the interesting things that people would actually do, they would wear dark and scratchy clothing. They wouldn't want to wear clothing that was really colorful or showed a new kind of style, because they didn't want to offend anybody. They didn't want to offend God. But with the Renaissance, they started to change up their clothing styles, and they started to eat different kinds of foods. People throughout society would become known as patrons of the arts as well. And they would find, and patrons of the arts would, many of which were part of this Italian wealthy merchant class within the city-states, they would financially support artists and artistic innovations. And some of the artists that would emerge from this are Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and you would also have people that would support not only the artists, but also writers and philosophers. So it was really a time of the expansion of ideas and art and literature, and it was a good time for the period. So here is a picture of Italy. And as I was talking about earlier, here is Sicily, by the way, where my family is from, and here's Palermo, actually. But the Renaissance really was full scale around in northern Italy, so around this area right here. And here's Rome, it's the capital, and here's the papal state of the Vatican, which houses the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, to be more precise. And here is Florence. And Florence is where the Renaissance really this was the birthplace of the Renaissance, was Florence, Italy. And here is a beautiful picture of Florence, Italy. So we'll now discuss some of the cultural shifts due to the Renaissance. So, as the Renaissance advanced, artistic styles would change, as well as our art in general changed. Much of the art before this time depicted religion, religious figures, and just had multiple religious symbols within it. And there is no doubt that during this time, there was a lot of religious influence within the art as well, but people also wanted to paint their own art that was different than just religious or cultural norms, and really innovate art as we know it today. So Renaissance artists would often portray religious subjects, but they used a realistic style copied from classical models such as Greek and Roman works. So again, in Italy, Greece and Rome had a lot of influence on those ideas had a lot of influence on the Renaissance as well, and we are seeing that directly related to the artwork as well. And before we go on, does anybody have any questions about the last slide or up to this point?
Okay, let me ask some questions for students. It can be very complicated, so I'm trying to simplify things and maybe come up with some questions for them. Maybe they don't know how to ask questions, but if they have questions, they are welcome to ask you. So you talked about 3 advantages. First, thriving cities. Second, wealthy sponsors. Of course, you need sponsors to support arts. And also, yeah, it makes sense that because Greece, the third point, Greece and Rome, they are the origins of Western civilization. But for the first one, the first advantage, the thriving cities, I think you need a lot of people to appreciate art, literature, or other masterpieces. You need people, right? You need a massive gatherings. So if this happens in a rural area, I guess it's not that convenient when it comes to transportation, or when it comes to or let's say tickets. You have to sell tickets, and then there's no one there to go to the concert or go to an exhibition. So this is how thriving cities become a very important factor.
That is a great point. Yes, and that during this time we obviously see, and kind of part of in Italy was the the expansion of these city-states and starting to pop up all over Italy. I mean, you had Venice, you had Florence, you had Rome. It just that's you had Milan. I mean, that's a good point. That you know, people started to gather into their own you know, these collective communities and started working. And this really um, a, a big point was they started to see that their specialization, you know, specialization could their work. So let's say their occupation, they could start doing that collectively within one city. So that is a good point. Yeah, this was a huge influence. The development of these city states throughout Italy um, really helped people to say, "Oh, we want to see this art as well." And um, people started saying, "Oh, how about you fund this art initiative by this artist?" And that started happening as well. So, um, so again, yes, these thriving city-states, this wealthy merchant class, and the classical heritage of Greece and Rome, those are the three big reasons why Italy was the birthplace of the Renaissance. So,
One more question.
of course.
So the shift from Christian values, because it was dominated by Christianity, right? So people try to go back to the period before Christianity thrived, like Greek myth and the Roman myth, and so it's kind of a shift away from Christian values, but yet they were still kind of under the influence. They had to do something still like under the umbrella, but done in a more secular way,
Yes.
kind of to avoid like censorship, or I don't know, because we don't have Christianity. I mean, it's not popular in Asia, so we have no idea how dominant it could be in the West.
Yes. Um, and so just a side note, what are like what is the most popular religion in Taiwan and China there?
I would say Taoism and Buddhism.
But yep, okay, that's what I thought. So just asking because it is so I find it so interesting. Like, and again, this is learning about different cultures for myself, you know, being raised in America where Christianity, more specifically Protestant faiths thrive here. Catholic faiths also thrive. I mean, I was brought up Catholic myself, and really you learn within the Catholic Church that was influencing Europe during this time, especially. Um, they are adamant, or they put an importance on tithing. So, you know, giving 10% of your salary, of your wealth to the church,
Oh,
that's a big thing. And the reason, and I will really get into religion and the impacts of religion during this time next class when we talk about the Protestant Reformation, in which Martin Luther said, hey, is some of this Catholic stuff just for money or power or fame? But to see how important um, the Catholic hierarchy was in this time, it is incredible. The Pope was like God during this time. Many people look to the Pope as God, they look to priests and bishops as like messengers of God. So during this time, yeah, and still today even you have these these um, these these Catholic officials having a lot of influence and power in the lives of people and telling people what to do, because in the Catholic faith, people believe that that the Pope and the priests, so the Catholic hierarchy, is directly linked to God. They can hear, they get messages about what God's telling them, and then they say that to the people. So it's you could kind of see, based on this Catholic hierarchy, how influential the Catholic Church and the Christian Church was in America during this, or not in America, in Europe, I should say, during this time. So, long story short, I assume that. Are there any further questions? If not, I will get back to share the screen again. And yes, we will now look at some of the cultural shifts due to the Renaissance. So, as the Renaissance advanced, artistic styles as well as art in general changed, as I had mentioned. So Renaissance artists often portrayed religious subjects, but they used a realistic style, such as from works such as Greek and Roman works. And an interesting style that emerged during the Renaissance and really gained influence was the technique of perspective, so which shows 3 dimensions on a flat surface. And I don't think I have the picture here, but it would be like 3-dimensional. So, like, let's say that this is a painting. You would be able to see, multiple, and by the way, this is a photograph, not a painting, but you would be able to see how, like, the distance, like how far out something was, such as these villages. You would be able to see the 3-dimensional dome. And so this perspective, I mean, was very big, because after this, people started using, depicting 3D portraits of people, and this became really influential work, and it would be in many people's households and homes. And so I would say 3, and there are multiple, but 3 of the most important and prominent artists during this time included that of Donatello, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo. These 3, if anybody here has watched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the 4 Ninja Turtles in that cartoon are named after Renaissance artists: Donatello, Michelangelo, Leonardo, and I believe Raphael. And these were the three of arguably 3 of the most prominent artists during this time, and they would shape the way we see art today. So the Renaissance also brought with it changes in literature and writing. Renaissance writers produced works that reflected their time, but they also used techniques that writers rely on today. And again, within writing, humanism was a big thing. How do you benefit yourself? How do you benefit the society around you? And Thomas More was actually he was probably the one of the most famous humanists / writers during this time. And in addition to the Italian Renaissance, some Renaissances that happened before this Italian Renaissance and the European Renaissance in general were the Tang, Song, and Han dynasties in China. They would also experience periods of great artistic and technological advances earlier in the world history. This was taking place in like the 800s and really early on. But I just thought that was an interesting side note, that countries and empires and dynasties throughout the world also experienced their own renaissances before this one. So this was not a new thing. Asia had already had their own. So here we see the Mona Lisa, which is arguably Leonardo da Vinci's most famous artwork. This is now in the Louvre in Paris, France, under heavy security, and it is beautiful. And they don't know exactly who this is. This could have been Leonardo da Vinci himself, or somebody that he had um, seen and decided to paint. But as you can see, it looks very realistic, almost 3D. If you look at the hands look almost 3D. It shows perspective, and it's just beautiful. And then here we see the Sistine Chapel, and this is the work of Michelangelo. And it is gorgeous. I have never been, but as in the beginning of class, Mr. Lin has been. He went before COVID, and this is just, again, it is quite incredible how he did this. He was on his back while doing this. He was painting upside down, and this depicts. And so in Christianity, there's towards the end of the Bible, which is the sole text of Christianity. There is a point that's called Judgment Day, when Jesus Christ comes back to earth, and they believe that he comes back to earth and resurrects those who made it to heaven, and then sends those that didn't make it to heaven to the underworld. So here, that this is basically what this is depicting with the soul, Jesus Christ. You also can see, I believe, Mary, his mother, is somewhere in here, and some other Christian figures are within this beautiful painting that Michelangelo had painted. And pardon this right here. So does anybody have any questions thus far? Okay. If not, we will move on to the Renaissance outside of Italy. So the Renaissance outside of Italy. So towards the end of the 15th century, Renaissance ideas began to spread north from Italy, bringing us to what is known as the Northern Renaissance. So if we go back to this map, the Renaissance would spread out of Italy and into 5 countries, major countries. So, or really 4 actually, which included England, France, Germany, and Flanders, which is modern day France, Netherlands, and partially Belgium. So these were being integrated into these English, French, German, and Flemish cultures. And by the mid 15th century, populations in cities were actually starting to grow in Europe after the aftermath of the Black Plague and 100-Year War. So as mentioned earlier, these 2 events, the Black Plague and the 100 Years' War, very dark period in Europe. And kind of like in America after World War II, people were very excited and happy after these 2 events transpired. So they started having more children. And so the populations in cities started to grow. And urban merchants started becoming wealthy enough to support artists, and their support of artists started to grow. So similarly to what happened in Italy, happened in other parts of Europe as well. These merchants started becoming wealthy, and they would support more artists, and artists, not just those who painted, but writers and philosophers, and just a whole bunch of cultural changes. They would support this. And as Renaissance ideas spread out of Italy, they would actually mingle in Northern traditions as well. Um, so as a result of this, the Northern Renaissance, or the Renaissance outside of Italy, would develop its own character. That would be different from Italy, but at the same time, the Northern Renaissance got some influence and from the Italian Renaissance. So their character, the character would, or the Renaissance in both of these places would mix together, but at the same time, Northern Renaissance would have its own character. So in 1494, a French king claimed the throne of Naples in southern Italy and launched an invasion into northern Italy. And so this would bring war, and many Italian artists and writers would leave for a safer life in northern Europe. And they would bring their styles and techniques of the Italian Renaissance. And so the Northern European artists who studied in Italy carried Renaissance ideas back to their homelands. So that's a prime example right there of how thoughts and just the culture of the Italian Renaissance would spread and mix within Europe and into the Northern Renaissance. So the support of wealthy merchant families in Flanders would help to make Flanders the artistic center of Northern Europe. And again, Flanders is modern day France, Netherlands, and partially Belgium. And again, Italian humanists were very interested in reviving classical languages and classical texts. So when the Italian humanists' ideas would reach the north in Europe, people used them to examine the traditional teachings of the church. And these Northern or European humanists were critical of the failure of the Christian church, which was primarily the Catholic Church at this time, to inspire people to live a Christian life. And remember, the challenging of the Catholic and Christian church, this really came after the Black Plague, in which many Europeans would pray and pray and pray to God to keep them safe and healthy and not have their friends die, and pray that everything was going to be okay. And obviously, not everything was okay, as 1/3 of Italy would die, or sorry, not 1/3 of Italy, 1/3 of Europe would die, and we would have many economic and cultural issues as a result of the Black Plague. So after these prayers were not answered per se, they started becoming critical of the church. And this criticism would produce a new movement known as Christian Humanism, with a focus on reforming society, helping societies grow, the society to grow, and they thought that a way to help to reform or grow the society in a good way was to make education a top priority. So, and not quite there yet, but during this period, the vast majority of Europeans were unable to read and write. So the families who could afford formal schooling usually sent their sons. And this was unfortunate. They would send their sons for some reasons, and very sadly, the daughters would often not get education and schooling. But there was somebody by the name of Christine de Pizan. She was a highly educated woman at this time and was one of the first women to earn a living as a writer. And she spoke out against this practice of just sending the sons to school, which she should. And she was one of the first European writers to question the different treatments of boys and girls. Her goal of formal education for children of both, the education of children of both genders would unfortunately not be achieved for many centuries. But she was one of those people during this time period that stood up and said girls and boys should be able to have education. And although this would not be achieved for a while, she still had influence, and which is awesome. And so the Renaissance outside of Italy continued. The Renaissance would spread to England in the mid 1500s, and this period became known as the Elizabethan age, after Queen Elizabeth I. And as Queen, Elizabeth I did much to support the development of English art and literature. She was adamant about education as well. And William Shakespeare was the most famous writer to come out of the Elizabethan age. Excuse me. And like many Renaissance writers, he would revert the classics and draw on them for inspiration and plots. A very, very smart man, William Shakespeare. His most famous plays were tragedies, and they include Macbeth, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, and King Lear. And these are still used today. Actually, in my college, we have classes that are focused on just William Shakespeare, or almost exclusively on William Shakespeare and how he influenced English and writing. And then probably one of the most important developments during the Renaissance was the rise of printing that took place during the Renaissance and became a great influence in modern world history and in world history in general. But the first printing would be used by wood blocks carved by hand, and these were done by the Chinese in 700 Common Era. So printing as we know it, though, from movable metal, was the invention of German goldsmith Johannes Gutenberg. And Johannes Gutenberg would bring his printing process to perfection in 1454. And it consisted of a type of mold for casting individual letters, and this press was adapted from the wine press of the day and used a sticky ink substance. And this press could print about 300 sheets per day, which was big because at this time it took a very long time to make a book. And so to make 300, to be able to produce 300 pages a day was huge. And the key impact of printing was that it enabled books to be produced more quickly, cheaply, and accurately, rather than by hand copying, and really the production of books more quicker would boost the spread of knowledge. And the Renaissance would also see the beginnings of the Age of Exploration, which took place from the 15th century to the 18th century and featured these European nations exploring and occupying regions throughout the globe. So that is right. The Renaissance was kind of the beginning of globalization and exploration throughout the world, and shaped the way that we see the world today. And here is a picture of William Shakespeare. Probably, so he is one of the most prominent and popular writers and thinkers throughout the Renaissance. And then here is Johannes Gutenberg's printing press. Yes, very revolutionary. So does anybody have any questions about those slides?
Do you want to finish the presentation first, or yeah?
Oh, sure. Yes, I will finish the presentation.
And then we can have some discussion.
Sounds good. We just have one slide to go, and that is the changes and really the impacts that resulted from the Renaissance. So but to finish kind of on the exploration part, exploration has always partially been motivated by curiosity, which is the desire to know what lies in the unknown. And although in the 1400s the great motivation for exploration was trade, obviously, um, but really, we're getting ahead of ourselves when we're talking about how it influenced exploration. Directly, the Renaissance was a period of great artistic and social change. It marked a break with the medieval period focused all around the church. And the Renaissance belief in the dignity of the individual, humanism, played a key role in the gradual rise of democratic ideas. Each person having their own voice, they can directly impact their environment and the things going on around them. And so here, some of the changes that resulted from the Renaissance included the arts starting to praise individual achievement, paintings and sculptures portraying individuals and nature in a more realistic and lifelike way, artists creating works that were secular as well as those that were religious, printing and the printing press, which made information more available and inexpensive enough for a society at large. Published accounts of new discoveries, maps, and charts, which led to further discoveries in a variety of fields. Christian humanists' attempts to reform society changed views about how life should be lived, and people began to question political and religious practices, which really started to give rise to exploration, but also the scientific revolution. And Renaissance ideas continued to influence European thought, including religious thought, and this would lead also to the Protestant Reformation, which we will talk about next class. So thank you, and that is the conclusion of this presentation.
And do you want to tell them more about the worksheet?
Yes. Okay. So if I will go ahead and do questions then after the worksheet, that's a good idea. So yes. So the worksheet for this class, we're going to identify the 5 countries in Europe where the Renaissance thrived during the 15th and 16th centuries. Also, the 14th century, because we are including Italy. So just on this map, if you could write, maybe put an arrow next to like Italy, for instance, put an arrow there and just say Italy. The second question, in your opinion, how would the world be different today if the printing press had not been invented? Third question, research Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Donatello, 3 of the most prominent artists during the Renaissance, and tell me whose work you admire the most. And it can be more than one of the people listed. It can even be all of the people listed because they were all incredible in what they did. But which one's work really jumps out to you, and which do you really like? And fourth, list 3 of the impacts or changes that the Renaissance had on modern world history. So yeah, that is the worksheet for this class. Okay.
Yeah, can everybody turn on their camera? 可以打开那个 camera 吗？还有Ben, could you and Katie? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of information for them to absorb, but I would like to encourage them to study more about the history of Europe, because it's very important to know, like you say, contextualize the knowledge, right? So you have to know where this thought or this idea came from, and then you can kind of understand their people's cultural background. So I've been to Rome and I've been to the Sistine Chapel, and so I want to tell these young students that they can save money. It's worth their money because you can learn a lot about different architectural, artistic achievements in different countries, especially in Italy. Sometimes it took them like dozens of years, even 100 years, to just build a magnificent cathedral like St. Peter Basilica. And that's the Pope's official residence. So I've been there twice, and every time you go there, you are just amazed by their artistic achievement. So I would like to encourage them to save money and to travel to Europe. And next time I'm planning a trip to Paris so that I can go to Louvre and then I'll see Da Vinci's masterpiece. Yeah, but one question for you, Henry. Yeah, like a Catholic Church
Of course.
preaches love for everyone. Yet during the Renaissance, you say it's the start of exploration, and then you can see the contradiction. Like first, you need to love people, yet you have to conquer them so that they can love God, they can love others. It's kind of very contradictory in nature, I think.
That is a good point. And yes, the Catholic Church is a Christian church. You know, it does preach love and unity, and there is no doubt about that. And I think that, but there's always when people are challenging the old ways of thinking, there will always be some conflicts there and some contradictions there. But really, I think if we can live in a way where we accept others and we always look um, to innovate, like they did during the Renaissance and the Scientific Revolution, um, major advancements come from that, as seen. So um, I hope that somewhat answers your
Oh,
question.
I would like to introduce Annie Liu to you.
Oh,
Annie is a school teacher. Oh,
good morning, Annie. How are you?
Annie, you have to unmute your mic. Unmute your mic. 麦克风要先打开。Yeah, because I muted you, sorry. Yeah, you are good to go.
There you go.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Annie. Nice to meet you. It's a very wonderful class. Thank you for having me here.
Oh my gosh. Nice to meet you as well, Annie. Thank you for being here.
I have been to Europe as well. I have been to France. It's so beautiful. And the pieces of art are very nice, especially the Mona Lisa. You stand in different places and you watch her eyes. She's always looking at you. I think it's very interesting.
Certainly. Oh my gosh, it's how he did that. How Leonardo da Vinci, and thank goodness that we do have work like that. But that is really cool. So both you and Luke have been to Europe. And as somebody that hasn't been to Europe but aspires to go, I definitely agree with Luke that you should save up to go because oh my gosh, I certainly am.
Lichi, have you ever been to Europe? No?
No,
Okay.
no.
Yeah, you should go.
Beautiful. Well,
And Ben, do you have any questions for Henry? Any question is a good question. So don't worry about your question is maybe too simple for him.
No.
No. So Ben, which part of history are you studying right now?
East Asia.
Oh, East Asia. Good, good. Have you studied European history? Some.
In I have studied in junior high.
Okay. So you do know some part of the area, right?
Yes.
Okay, good, good. And have you ever been to Europe, Ben?
No.
Tell your mom to take you to Europe. And I suggest that you study another second language. Okay, so that you can speak some European languages once you are there. I'm studying German, French, Italian, and French.
Wow.
It's crazy, I know. Okay, so Henry, thank you so much for your class. I think it took you a lot of time to prepare for the presentation. So we really appreciate your hard work.
Well, of course, thank you very much for this opportunity again.
Yeah, thank you.
Again,
I think June is taking a train somewhere, so next time she will participate more, I think.
oh,
Yeah.
no problem whatsoever. And Annie, it was nice to meet you, or Mrs. Liu. Nice to
Yeah,
meet
me
you.
too.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
And class, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out via Skype.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
I try to study.
Oh, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
You all have
Okay.
a good week.
We'll see you next week. Okay. Bye bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Good night.